BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. This is a recap and a reiteration of an upload that I did the day before yesterday. I put one out, but the graphic on that was something that I was trying to do in a different way, as opposed to the bubbles that you see here. I thought about using a different method, and I was just like, that looks so terrible. I've now made that video unlisted, but I really wanted to continue the discussion and just put up the stuff that we were talking about, so I thought I would just re-record it and we would continue onward with the discussion, so it would still be available in hopefully somewhat of a more bubbly format. But yeah, what we were talking about was I encountered the book Life Code by Dr. Phil, and in the past I thought that Dr. Phil was just an absolute clown. I thought that he was just someone that was 100% in the clown zone, but I began to notice that I was mentioning him on the channel rather frequently. It was because of Dr. Phil that I learned about the disappearance of Kyron Horman, one that we talked a lot about in 2017, and we did a couple uploads in 2018 as well. And Dr. Phil also had a lot of things to say about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. She came up on in many interviews with Dr. Phil and was the prime subject of his podcast. So I began to sort of recognize that, okay, yeah, Dr. Phil is clownish, but he talks about some interesting subjects. And I'm not going to lie to you, from time to time I maybe go through a little bit of binge watching on the Dr. Phil show just to see the people like the Cash Me Outside girl and various guests of a similar nature. So now I say that Dr. Phil is not 100% a clown, he is 95% of a clown. And as if that means anything, to Dr. Phil, the dude from Black Box Radio gave you a promotion. Yes, so that you can hold your applause. But anyway, I was reading his book Life Code, and what I came across was a lot of the comments that Dr. Phil was making sounded the way that we were describing serial killers. But he's not talking about serial killers. He was talking about abusive relationships. And primarily the way that the abuser acts toward the person that they are abusing. It really just seems like so many things that we mentioned about serial killers, like the cycle of destructive behaviors, projecting the abuse outward, but also just the fact, like the way that they isolate their victims to kind of unleash the unhealed childhood trauma, all of that stuff we were talking about with serial killers. And I was really reminded of the way that Ted Bundy would go about this when we were doing our uploads on Ted Bundy last year. It was like talking about how they kind of put on the facade, they try to be very charming at first, and then they sort of unleash the wrath and terror upon the victim. And the thing is, though, Dr. Phil explores something in this book, Life Code, that is rather interesting, because what we've really done on the channel is we've talked about all of those things. Childhood trauma, the cycle of destructive behaviors that happens. We mentioned shattering the pillars of childhood. But all of those things are just descriptions of the problem. They're descriptions of how the problem came to be. How did this person end up with these destructive tendencies, whether they're the abuser in a relationship, or they are the serial killer, or they're any sort of true crime deviant. How did they get to that point? But this book, Life Code, kind of expands it in a little further, in sort of an almost zero tolerance fashion. It's like, okay, somebody in an abusive relationship might have motivations that led to that. There might be reasons that created this destructive scenario, but it condemns it completely. Yes, we try to understand, but it's very important for us to remember that this type of behavior needs to be condemned in an absolute 100% manner, because the people who are doing the destructive actions, whether it's the abuser or the murderer, they have the choice to do so. They have the ability to do so. They have the ability to choose what they want to do and their decisions. Especially when you look at the concept of an abusive relationship. The person in the abusive relationship knows exactly what they're doing. They know that they're abusing the person, and they have the choice not to. In the original video, I was really talking about, for right now, for a second, it would be like if you kind of eliminate the psychopathic torture murderers like Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy, who are level 22 on Dr. Michael Stone's hierarchy of evil. And if you eliminate even Ted Bundy, who was level 17, a sexually motivated murderer, because those people are following sexual urges. If you look at more people who are going to be like the type of murderer that you would see on Forensic Files, because I said last year, every other episode of Forensic Files is somebody who murdered their business partner to get control of the business. They murdered their spouse to get control of the life insurance policy money, those types of things. If you look at that, especially those two things in comparison, the abuser in the relationship and the person who was committing the murder in order to enhance their own wealth, particularly, as well as perhaps power. If you're going to be talking about running a business, you have many dynamics going on. Those people have choices. They have an enormous amount of choice. They have the ability to decide what they want to do, and they know what they're doing. They know they're doing something illegal. They know they're doing something wrong. They know they're doing something immoral. They know they're doing something unethical, and they choose to do it anyway. The reason why I excluded people like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and John Wayne Gacy, the psychopathic torture murderers and the sexually driven killers, is because those people have a type of urge that they need to satiate. They have a sexual urge that is kind of pushing them forward. And I think that that kind of adds a new element to the situation. It's not somebody that is doing things only because of greed. They actually have a biological urge that is driving them toward these types of destructive behavior to the point of murder. But I think that it's very important to talk about how this process works, because the real thing that stood out to me, the first and foremost thing that connected with me when we were talking about life code and how the comments that we made about serial killers in relation to abusers in relationships is something that we mentioned during our Ted Bundy upload last year, when we said that a psychopath views a person as a way to excite themselves. They're just using this person to enhance their own feeling, enhance their own gratification. And just the idea that if they murder somebody and this person has a family, their family is going to miss the person, the family is going to be grieving, people are going to be looking for this person, thinking about those things is going to add a level of excitement to the psychopath. They don't feel sympathy and empathy for anyone, but they will just use it to enhance their own excitement. They view it as an exciting situation. And in the book Life Code, they said practically the same thing about abusive relationships, that the abuser knows that they're bringing pain to the person that they are abusing, but they're choosing to do it anyway. They are choosing to abuse their partner. And the reason why they keep doing it is because it adds to a certain level of excitement as well. And it was almost the exact same thing that we had said about Ted Bundy. They're talking about abusive relationships. And that really stood out to me in this book, Life Code. But as we keep exploring this, we really have to understand that there are levels of how these things would function. And I think it's very valuable to have something like Dr. Michael Stone's Hierarchy of Evil, where we can explore these things, because once you get to the psychopathic torture murderers, people who are torturing someone to death for their own gratification, I think that that definitely is more extreme. I think that that is something that is very much more intense. But at the same time, there are a few similarities that we do find even in the much lighter things. Not even talking about murder, but dealing with people who are in the abusive relationships, the abusers, and what Dr. Phil likes to call baiters, like the person who is like, you do see though, there is a big similarity. They find a victim in a vulnerable place and they isolate them. It really just is that. It's just kind of like degrees of intensity. And even before Michael Stone's Hierarchy, which begins at level 1 because he's mostly talking about murder, this is almost like level 0 or level 0.5, someone who is looking for a target. The serial killer or the abuser in the relationship, they isolate the victim and then they unleash their havoc on them. Whereas of course, somebody like John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, or Ted Bundy would of course murder the person, and Dahmer and Gacy would do very torturous things first, whereas Ted Bundy was much more about the sexual deviant side of it all. So the thing is, though, when you're going to be exploring things from that angle, Dr. Phil even talks about this on something that he calls the nefarious 15, like 15 sort of very evil points. But one of them was about isolating the victims. It's just you're isolating the victim, except in one instance there is abuse, and in other instances it becomes much more severe, leading to things like murder. But the big kind of takeaway from the book Life Code is the concept of all of it is evil. Yes, of course, the psychopathic torture murderers are evil, but even the abusers and the relationships are evil because they they have the ability not to abuse. They have the choices that they can make in life that would lead them to not abuse somebody. And it's about there are a couple ways that we recreate the cycle of destructive behaviors. On the one hand, some people bring it within themselves; they internalize it, what we call importing. I mean, that's what we call it on this channel. I mean, I'm not sure if anyone else does. They import it with things like alcoholism, addiction, promiscuous and risky behavior. Some people export the cycle of destructive behaviors, and that would be like the people who start abusing somebody else. It's not like, oh, I finally found a good partner. I finally found someone who is nice to me and supportive and respects my choices and is very loving. Now I'm free from destruction. No, the person is like, once they find that kind of nice person, they export their problems outward and they export the abuse outward. They find someone in a vulnerable place, they start abusing them instead. Remember, once again, the cycle of abuse, the abused abuse, cycle of destructive behaviors. Some people import it with things that we talked about, and some people export it as well. It's kind of an import-export thing that can happen with destruction. And we're talking about very clearly destructive behavior. So, I think, though, we can be aware of these things and we can be aware how they function, but we have to condemn it immediately. That's my takeaway from reading this book, Life Code, so far. And I mentioned the day before yesterday, I finished part one, just started part two, and we're going to keep exploring these concepts a little bit more. I did say, though, the reason why I was reading this one is I had always wanted to read a book by Dr. Phil ever since I sort of found out that he was talking about interesting material. But I was like, even before that, though, when I was in Borders, before like Books a Million and Barnes and Noble, like I mean Borders, that used to be the other bookstore chain, and I would always see all these different books by Dr. Phil, and I would think that did he really write those? I mean, with all of the other things he's doing, the TV show and all of appearances, and he's even now, he talks about running the podcast where he was dealing with Gypsy Rose Blanchard. It's like, does he really write his books, or does he have somebody else kind of do it for him, like a ghostwriter? Or perhaps what they talked about in the movie Richard Jewell, where you just sit down with somebody and you ask them yes or no questions and something like that. But so, yes, I'm still reading the book Life Code, and we can see where it goes. I know Dr. Phil isn't very well respected, but now he's only 95% of a clown. I would love to know what you guys would think about any of this. Once again, this is a recap of a previous upload that I did that I now made unlisted, but I wanted to put the material out there. And I'd say the biggest observation that we covered was simply that, well, it's the way that a psychopath murders someone and feels excitement knowing that there's going to be misery brought to other people, like the family members of the person that they've murdered. Feeling that same thing about an abusive relationship, that the abuser knows that they're bringing pain and misery to the person that they are abusing, or perhaps even making other people feel misery, and that increases their excitement. It almost just feels like that is a much lighter degree of the kind of intensity of abuse. What do you guys have to say about any of this? If you have anything to say at all about the subject, please drop a comment below. If you disagree with me completely, let's challenge it in the comments section. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed already, you're welcome to subscribe. And I would love to just hear some more things about what you guys have to say. And oh yeah, if you want to check out the things with the new graphic, you can watch our upload on the Illuminati and some new perspectives on the concept of the Illuminati, if anybody's into that. Hopefully I'll post a link in the comment section or the description box, and that'll be available. But I would love to hear from you guys. Until next time.